Treasures from Grandma by Arleta Richardson, illustrated by Jerde. Chapter 9. Really Responsible.
Ma, why didn't you have 2 more daughters instead of sons?
We were canning vegetables and I was in charge of boiling the jars. Ma stirred the tomatoes before she answered.
I didn't have much choice about that,
she told me.
I'm thankful to have 1 daughter. Sons are pretty nice to have too. I can't think what for,
I retorted.
Why don't they have to stand over a hot stove once in a while?
For the same reason you don't spend the days in the field with Pa or milk the cows night and morning. It's called a division of labor.
Not a very fair division if you ask me, I grumbled. I'd rather be outdoors in the fresh air and sunshine.
All right, I'll watch those jars and you go get some peas and lettuce from the garden, Ma offered. It's time to start dinner.
That's not what I had in mind.
I know,
Ma replied dryly.
What you had in mind was sitting on the fence gazing out across the field. But that doesn't run a farm.
While I washed the lettuce at the pump and shelled the peas, I dreamed about what I might be doing in 5 years. My dreams definitely didn't include a farm.
I think I'd like to go far, far away,
I announced to Ma as I carried the pans into the kitchen.
You've already been far, far away, she said. You should be able to separate the pods from the peas better than this.
I was thinking of my future,
I told her.
If your future is anything like your present, you're going to need a caretaker,
Ma retorted.
I wish you'd learn to keep your mind on your work. Can't you see that it takes twice as long to do a job over again?
Later, Sarah Jane dropped in and we sat on the porch to talk.
I've been making plans for my future,
I said.
There aren't a whole lot of things a girl can do, but I'd like to do all of them. How many lives are you planning on living?
Sarah Jane answered.
I'd be glad to think of one thing I'd like to do.
I looked at her thoughtfully.
Your biggest talent is telling me when I'm wrong, I said.
There must be some way you could build that into a career.
I ducked my head as she swatted at me.
What are these things you want to do? She asked.
I could teach school, or maybe be a nurse, or
you could get married,
Sarah Jane finished for me.
I think your best choice is right there. You could be a farmer's wife, or a minister's wife, or a storekeeper's wife, or...
No,
I interrupted her.
I've been someone's daughter this far in my life, and I don't want to be someone's wife the rest of it. I want to be successful on my own. I'd like to have a really responsible place in life.
Sarah Jane shook her head.
You're dreaming, Mabel. That would mean you'd be in charge of something. Can you imagine what a disaster that would be?
Sarah Jane, I don't discourage you when you tell me about your dreams.
Of course not,
she replied.
I don't want to try anything I'm not able to accomplish. What you have to do is suit your ambitions to your capabilities. When you get older, you'll thank me for my advice.
Just don't stand on one foot until I do, I retorted.
But when I reported the conversation to Ma that evening, I admitted the truth of Sarah Jane's remarks.
That's the maddening thing about Sarah Jane. She's usually right. You've improved somewhat over the years, Ma told me. But you have a ways to go. I appreciate every little bit of progress.
I've never had any big responsibility to see if I could handle it, Ma. How does anyone know what I'd do?
Do you remember the parable of the talents that Jesus told? The master said that when the servant was faithful over a little, he would receive much. You have to prove yourself in small things, and then you'll be trusted with large ones.
From now on, I'm going to be a responsible person, I declared. I'll show everyone. Responsible for what?
Roy asked as he came into the kitchen.
Seems to me you're already responsible for everything that goes wrong around here. What more do you want?
Now, Roy,
Ma warned.
I'll ignore that, I said. He'll see, too.
A few days later, Ma asked me to sew some buttons on Pa's shirt.
Sure, I replied, just as soon as I finish this chapter.
I took the buttons and slipped them in my apron pocket. Before I had reached the end of the page, Sarah Jane arrived with some exciting news.
How would you like to take a trip to Eastman with me? She asked. We're going to leave on the early morning train and come back on the evening one. We'll have all day to look around town and have a picnic in the park. Won't that be fun?
I'd love to,
I exclaimed. "I think Ma would let me go. What day will it be?" "Friday," Sarah Jane replied. "The day after tomorrow."
"That would be a nice trip,"
Ma said when we asked her.
"It was kind of your folks to invite Mabel to share the day with you. Will you be taking the 7:30 train?"
"Yes, ma'am,"
Sarah Jane replied.
"and Mabel won't need to bring anything. Ma will have enough lunch for all of us."
"Perhaps you could pick up some yard goods and thread for me, Mabel,"
Ma said.
"That is, if you aren't having such a good time you forget it."
"I told you I was going to be more reliable," I replied. "Of course I won't forget it."
Sarah Jane and I went outside to talk about the trip.
"You shouldn't be promising things like being more reliable," she said. "You know how easy it is for you to have something on your mind and not remember stuff."
"If you weren't my best friend, I wouldn't have anything to do with you," I said. "Don't you think people can change for the better?"
"Certainly people can," Sarah Jane replied. "It's just you that I don't have much hope for. But never mind, I'll help you remember what your ma wants."
I didn't have to be called on Friday morning. I was up as soon as I heard Ma in the kitchen. My good dress and shoes were ready to put on, but I would wait until after breakfast to get dressed. As I set the table, I went over what Ma had asked for.
"You want 6 yards of a pretty blue print, 8 yards of white shirting, and 3 spools of white thread. Is that right?" "Yes,"
Ma said.
"that's it. I'll surely be glad to have it. Pa and the boys need shirts in the worst way. Which reminds me, Pa is going to town this morning, and the only shirt he has to wear is the one you sewed the buttons on the other day. Where did you put it?"
"I'll go see,"
I said hurriedly.
"I think it's in my room."
I knew it was in my room, hanging over my chair. But where were the buttons? I didn't have much time to find them and get them sewed on. I couldn't tell Ma that I'd forgotten about it. Frantically, I tried to remember what I had been doing when she gave them to me.
"Mabel,"
Ma called.
"you'd better hurry if you're going to eat. Here's Sarah Jane coming up the steps now."
But I couldn't find them anyplace. I looked everywhere I thought the buttons could be and then went back and looked again. I could hear Ma and Sarah Jane talking in the kitchen, and I knew I couldn't stay in my room forever. Reluctantly, I took the shirt and went out to face Ma.
"You've either done something you shouldn't or haven't done something you should," Sarah Jane said with a sigh. "I can tell by the look on your face." "I didn't sew the buttons on Pa's shirt, and now I don't know where they are," I blurted.
"I'm not surprised," Ma replied. "I thought when I saw you put those buttons in your pocket that they'd be out of sight, out of mind."
"Oh, that's right. They're in my apron. But I won't have time to do what I was supposed to and still go. It's my own fault. I can't blame anyone else."
I looked imploringly at Ma.
"Would you do it for me just this once, if I promise not to forget again?"
Ma looked sorry, but she shook her head.
"I don't think I will, Mabel. I'm afraid there's no other way for you to learn than to repair your own mistakes."
I nodded and went back to my room to get the buttons. I couldn't help crying as I thought of the beautiful day we had planned. It was all spoiled, and it was my own fault. When I returned to the kitchen, Sarah Jane was sitting at the table. I wiped my eyes, sat down, and jabbed at a button.
"You'd better hurry up," I said to her. "There's no sense in both of us missing the trip." "Shall I tell her before she finishes that job?" Sarah Jane asked Ma. "Tell me what?" "I just came by to let you know that we can't go this morning because Pa hurt his foot. We're going tomorrow instead. Now aren't you glad you have another opportunity to prove how reliable you can be? You won't get a second chance every time, you know."
"I'm sorry your Pa hurt his foot, but I'm glad I can go."
"And who knows, Sarah Jane? I might live long enough to become as upright and virtuous as you are." "Never mind," she said with a grin. "I'm willing to do anything I can to help you improve. After all, you are my best friend."
End of chapter 9.